As active stewards of their land, and as a community deeply connected to the Fraser River and Maria Slough, SIB is working on a plan to manage flood impacts. This work is led by SIB Special Projects and supported by Curwood Lytle Consultants. This presentation provides an overview of what we did and the results of this work. So what is a flood management and emergency plan? It is a process to help SIB understand flood risks, identify steps that could be taken to reduce harm, and map out the best path forward. Why is this important? This work builds on a long history of SIB living with the river and managing floods. SIB identified the opportunity to create a plan for how to ensure the continued health, prosperity, and resilience of the community that is living in harmony with the land and water. The plan was drafted based on our current understanding of technical information about flood risks and our understanding of community vision, values, and preferences. The result is a flood management and emergency plan that responds to existing conditions and hazards, but also plans for future generations. For this work to be successful, it needs to reflect the vision, values, and preferences of SIB staff and the Seabird Island community. This plan was developed with input from staff, chief and council, and community members through a community survey, meetings, and workshops. Now, the project team is presenting a draft plan to community members and asking for your input. Engagement to date has helped inform a set of principles to guide SIB's approach to flood and emergency management planning. These principles include: Seabird Island takes care of everything on the lands. Recognize the role of SIB as stewards of its lands, people, and unique history. Community members told us to ensure that flood management measures do not disrupt ongoing connection to the land, river, and food supply for today and tomorrow. They also raised that this work should reflect the broader goals of the community, including economic opportunities, affordable and safe housing, and protection of Seabird's historic and cultural sites. This work should build on local knowledge and history of SIB's long experience of living with the river and in balance with nature. And this work should take care of all parts of the Seabird Island community: homes, facilities, people, with attention to those most vulnerable, while acknowledging Seabird Island's relationships to neighbors, the region, and the planet. Part of managing floods is understanding flood risks. Seabird Island is within a flood hazard area. It is exposed to a range of flood and erosion hazards from the Fraser River, Maria Slough, groundwater, and intense rainstorms. The highway embankment provides some protection from Fraser River flood hazards. Some hazards are more severe than others, and the plan helps us understand the differences. Climate change is expected to increase the intensity and frequency of many of these hazards. There are a number of key strategies or approaches to addressing flood hazards. For example, SIB could keep floodwaters away from people by protecting existing development in high-density areas like the existing community core and Strawberry Island. Or SIB could allow floods to happen while minimizing disruptions by raising future buildings and making infrastructure more flood-proof to accommodate flood hazards. Or SIB could keep people away from floodwaters by avoiding increasing development in higher hazard areas and areas of high natural value. Or by retreating buildings to lower hazard areas in the future when the buildings need to be replaced. And finally, SIB could accept an appropriate level of flood risk in areas where the consequences of flooding are acceptable. The draft plan suggests different approaches for different areas of Seabird Island and ways in which different strategies could work together. Not all of SIB's lands are impacted by floods in the same way. As a result, different areas of SIB's lands will need different strategies. The draft flood management plan identifies different flood management zones based on hazard exposure, the unique combination of hazards that each area faces, level of existing development, how much development is already there, and the future vision for the land, what SIB wants to do or achieve in the area over the long term. Guided by the principles developed through engagement with community members and staff, SIB's overall approach involves protecting the buildings and services SIB has now while maintaining access to the river and food supply and taking care of the land. Working to accommodate floods as SIB replaces infrastructure with new, more flood-resilient development, accepting a certain amount of risk in areas that are not inhabited and do not contain key infrastructure. And when planning for the future, adapting land uses to strengthen flood management. To support these strategies, the draft plan recommends 35 specific tools that fall into 7 main categories: land use planning, site-specific tools, structural flood protection, watershed and river management, outreach and education, emergency management, and flood insurance. Some of the most important tools include completing additional hazard studies in key areas, formalizing an understanding with the Ministry of Transportation regarding the flood protection role of the highway, creating a flood hazard planning map, using the planning map to define what can be built where and how, creating a flood-specific section of the draft emergency plan, and remaining engaged with regional groups like the Fraser Basin Council and Emergency Planning Secretariat on continued regional flood management work. Now we want to hear from you. What questions or comments do you have about the draft plan? What is most important when planning for floods on Seabird Island? Please visit www.seabirdisland.ca/si-emergency-plan to find a copy of the draft plan, information about our virtual open house on October 21st, and a form to submit your feedback. Thank you for your interest in this project and your valuable input.